Joining me now, Ivo Daalder, former U.S. ambassador to NATO, now a senior fellow at Harvard's Belfer Center. Ivo, good to speak to you.
Glad to be here, Jim.
So the Romanian foreign minister going right up to, but not quite saying Russia did this deliberately. From your point of view, given that Russian drones have breached European airspace now multiple times over the last several months, and that European officials just in recent days have been saying they suspect Russia might be preparing to attack in some way a NATO ally. Does this look to you like a deliberate attack?
You know, I don't know if it's deliberate or not, but it doesn't really matter. What's going on is the reality that Russia is engaged in a war of aggression against a European country, Ukraine, and it's not doing very well in that war. In fact, in the last few months, it is starting to lose territory for the first time in well over a year. The British intelligence chiefs have just reported that 500,000 Russians have lost their lives. That's an awful lot of people. That the economy is tanking. Growth, official numbers for growth have it going down from 1.4 to 0.3% of GDP this year, and the economy has not been growing. And Vladimir Putin is trying to figure out a way to get out of here. And what better than to try to figure out a way, if he can distract attention from his failures, start pointing to blame to NATO and to European countries. And so whether or not the drone was actually meant to hit this building, it's a natural consequence of the action that Russia has been taking for so long.
More broadly, Russia has been carrying out, they've been accused by, as you know, European and NATO allies' intelligence services of carrying out deliberate attacks, of sabotage, as well as other forms of interference in elections. You know the long list of deliberate actions that Russia has been accused of. Do you believe that the Russian leader has been emboldened by a partial U.S. retreat from Europe, the reduction in U.S. forces in Romania, Germany, but also just the president's rhetoric about NATO being a paper tiger and reducing America's commitment to it in general? Has that emboldened the Russian leader?
Well, whether it has emboldened or not, he's clearly more than pleased to see a division between the United States and Europe, a division that is deeper and more significant than probably any division we have seen between the United States and Europe in the long history of U.S.-European relations since the post-war period. And of course, the Soviet Union and now Russia has had one goal in mind since 1945, which is to get the United States out of Europe. And to the extent of our differences among allies, differences between the United States and our European allies, to the extent that the president, the secretary of defense, the secretary of state are starting to question the value of NATO, that plays right into Vladimir Putin's hands. And in order for him to push that along, many European intelligence services are worried that he might step up his hybrid activities, which you talked about, and actually challenge NATO boundaries more directly, whether that's in the Baltic states or perhaps this kind of drone attack, to see how NATO reacts. And importantly, to see how the president of the United States reacts, to see if there is a reaction from Washington, which I guess so far, at least I haven't seen one. You may have, but I haven't seen one. And it just raises this question of, are we all on the same side? And he's testing that. And the answer so far is maybe not.
Yeah, I saw a comment from the U.S. ambassador to NATO, but not from the president himself. Let me ask you this, because I was speaking to Carl Bildt earlier this afternoon, of course, former Swedish prime minister, and he said that Putin's comments recently have indicated that he has given up on Trump to some degree, that he believed that Trump was going to help him with the Ukraine war, that he believed that he'd made progress pushing Trump to something more favorable for Russia in the summit in Alaska, but that now he just doesn't believe Trump can make any of that happen. Do you read that similarly? I mean, is Putin to some degree viewing Trump now as a lame duck as it relates to Ukraine?
Well, clearly, President Trump has not been able to deliver what Vladimir Putin wants, which is Ukraine agreeing to give up territory it currently holds. That has been the policy of the United States. It's been the policy of the President of the United States. It's been the policy of the negotiators with Russia on the United States to trade security assurances on the one hand and a ceasefire on the other for giving up all of the Donbass, critical territory that Ukraine has been fighting over since 2014. It has major fortifications, and that's what they have wanted. President Trump has not delivered on that as far as Vladimir Putin is concerned. So yes, I think it is very likely that he has given up on the United States. In fact, he's made recent weeks said that maybe there should be a European interlocutor. Remember, of course, that the Europeans did negotiate for many years on the issue of Ukraine, and Vladimir Putin got a lot of what he wanted at that point. So maybe that's what he's looking at again.
He did, and then, of course, violated, as you know, many of those agreements. Ivo Daalder, thanks so much for joining.
My pleasure, Jim.